Welcome in, guys. Happy Friday to everyone out there. We made it through another week, but of course, you know what it means when it's Friday. It's time for another episode of Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I'm your host, Britt Flinn. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, as always, we've got a lot to talk about today. That game last night, oh my gosh, who saw that coming? If you're in the chat, thank you so much for being in here. While you're there, go ahead and like and subscribe. It's just a couple clicks, helps everybody out. As part of the game last night, since nobody saw the Bears just completely routing the Commanders, we're going to do some week 5 bold predictions. We're also going to recap that game, talk about some starts and sits for this week. And we, of course, are going to talk about some underdog pick'ems that you can play for this week coming up into week 5. Thank you to our producer, Ernie Acosta, as always, for being here and just making sure that everything rolls smoothly because God knows I need it. But let's go ahead and jump right in. So, again, the game last night, I don't know if there was a single person outside of a Bears fan who picked the Bears to win. Not only who picked them to win, but picked them to completely rout the Commanders. Last night's game just goes to show you that literally anything can happen at any given time in the NFL because last week the Commanders nearly took down Philadelphia. And last night they got blown out by not only a team that was winless, but a team that was basically playing with backups and a team that continued to lose players throughout the night. So let's break down some pieces of that game and we'll go ahead and start with the Bears since they were the winners. We always like to start with the winners here. Hello, Toronto Dave. Hello, Hal. Thank you so much for being in the chat today. Really appreciate you guys joining us. So Justin Fields and DJ Moore, they looked good last week, but last night they took it to an entirely other level. They took it to the stratosphere. Moore set a career record for receiving yardage in a single game, going 8 of 10 for 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. Normally, I would like that because I played Justin Fields. I have Justin Fields in a couple of leagues. I have DJ Moore in a couple of leagues. But the leagues that I have him in or don't have him in, I somehow drew the luck of the draw that I was playing against him. So every time Fields scored a touchdown, I was like, please don't be more. Please don't be more. But it was almost always more. Absolutely crazy. Most of Fields' passing yardage actually did go to DJ Moore as he finished 15 of 29 with 282 yards and 4 touchdown passes, the only other one going to Cole Kmet. When Fields has targeted DJ Moore this season, he has gone 27 of 34 for 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and he has a perfect passer rating. The connection is there and keeps on growing, but I will say he needs to get on the same page with the other receivers on the team because now that this has been broadcast to the league, defenses are going to key in on DJ Moore and they're going to get shut down. So that connection with Darnell Mooney really needs to get consolidated. Now that Chase Claypool is off the team, it's basically DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, and Cole Kmet as the main receivers. And you've got to get some rapport built with the entire team, not just one, if you want to continue to compete. But it was still a very, very great game for both Fields and DJ Moore last night. Hal in the chat, congratulations. You started Fields and DJ Moore in your biggest team, a 14-team Superflex. Dude, it's not even Sunday. And congratulations on the win because that's going to be very hard for your opposing team to come back from. So good going there. Good decision making. Rex in the chat, playing against the resident Bears fan. Oh, my condolences. You know, it's the yin and yang. We've got Hal doing so well, and then Rex just sitting, just kind of, well, what do I do now? Don't worry, hang around. We're going to tell you what you do now with the start sit 'em, but we're going to go ahead and get through the rest of this Thursday night football game. Unfortunately, injuries continued to plague the Bears, Both Khalil Herbert and Roshan Johnson went out due to injury. Travis Homer even came in for a little bit, and then something happened where he didn't return. They ended up finishing the game using their fullback, Kari Blasingame, and even he looked good. So, whatever the Bears have got going on, whether it was just some hard love from the coaching, whether it, you know, they finally got everything gelled together, don't really know, but the Bears looked very, very good last night. Fields did take 3 sacks, but he showed good awareness on a lot of those heavy pressures that came his way. He got the ball out, one of which should have been intentional grounding, in my opinion. But nevertheless, he looked very good. He avoided what could have been some very bad situations. Now let's move on to the Washington Commanders. The Commanders' defense, which was the top streaming option this week, fell extremely, extremely flat. And that is something that they're going to have to fix if they want to compete with a much more difficult schedule down the road. You cannot give up 40 points to a team that up until last night averaged under 20 points a game. You just can't do it. The Commanders also on offense, who should have been able to run the ball all night long, fell very flat in that department. They gave up over 400 yards. And although they were able to get a few sacks, they really couldn't stop anything. Their offensive line is also a huge, huge problem. They've allowed the most sacks in the league so far this year, and the run game, even against the worst rushing defense in the league, was only able to put up 29 rushing yards. Brian Robinson got 10, and the rest, 19, were Sam Howell, just scrambling. And I will give Sam Howell his props. There were a lot of times when he was scrambling, I was like, oh, he's down. He's done. He actually fought for a lot of that yardage. So give Sam Howell his props. But man, Washington, you have got to get your offensive line together if you're going to compete. Again, going back to the defense, even with all the missing pieces in Chicago's secondary, Washington also chose to incorporate Byron Pringle and Jamison Crowder in their late quarter comeback plan. Like, why? You've got Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, and you're acting like they're invisible. Make it make sense, Ron Rivera. Make it make sense, Eric Bieniemy. Because why are you using these journeyman guys who we've, in all honesty, have forgotten their names? Why are you choosing to incorporate them when you have a chance to come back and win this game? On a positive note, at least they did get Antonio Gibson involved. He actually played more snaps than Brian Robinson, and maybe it was just game script, but when he was on the field, he came in clutch in some very, very big plays. Hopefully, this means that Bieniemy will incorporate him more because he definitely deserves it. He finished with 6 targets on 28 routes run, and although he didn't carry the ball, he finished third on the team in passing yards, just behind Logan Thomas and Curtis Samuel with 64 yards. So that is very promising for all of us who thought that Antonio Gibson was persona non grata, including myself, who was very high on him going into this season. And speaking of Logan Thomas, I mean, he may be the real deal. I know that Eddie Jackson was out for the Bears. Andrew Cooper talked about it. Logan Thomas was a play of the week for him. He was in my waiver wire article over at fantasyalarm.com. But 11 targets is monstrous. It was his best game statistically since 2020. And we know how Eric Bieniemy loves to use tight ends in this offense. So if you picked him up on waivers, you were rewarded big time. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, Sam Howell showed some grit. I mean, the first half, admittedly, was just god awful, but he battled back and still finished with 388 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and only 1 interception. You've got to think that if Ron Rivera had been a little less conservative and had chosen to go for it on a couple of those fourth and shorts, that this game could have been a lot closer the way Howell was playing. And in my opinion, a guy whose name is Riverboat Ron, when are we going to send him down the river? If you can't go for it on fourth and short with the way that Chicago's defense has been playing, especially in the run game, you succeeded a couple times using that push. Why did you kick field goals? You were down. You had nothing to lose except the game by not going for it. And by playing conservative, that's exactly what happened. So, very interested in seeing how Ron Rivera responds to the criticism for kicking those field goals and not going for it. But we'll just have to wait and see. Guys in the chat, happy Friday, Mr. Scampers. Great to see you. Hi, Rod. Need to Pittman, Brees Hall, or David Montgomery. I'm going Brees Hall and David Montgomery. We will get to that later as to the reasoning why in the stardom and situm portion of this show. So just sit tight and we'll get to you. As well, would I start Cousins over Burrow this week? Absolutely. I cannot play Joe Burrow in any lineup until he shows that he's absolutely healthy. I know that he's been taken off the injury report officially, but let's be honest, this guy does not look good. He doesn't have that movement, that motion that he needs in the pocket. T. Higgins is likely out. And the Cardinals have been playing with a lot of grit, to be honest. Hal in the chat, Riverboat Ron, more like paddle boat Tom, I'm guessing, instead of ton. Yeah, I agree. So with that, let's get to a little bit of top news. First, the saga in Chicago is over. Chase Claypool has been traded to the Miami Dolphins. I'm not really sure how much that moves the needle for anyone, but at least we don't have to hear about the drama in Chicago anymore. So there's that. There are also some very high profile players who have returned to practice and potentially game action this week that could be happening. Cooper Kupp practiced in full Thursday and could be making his season debut against the Philadelphia Eagles this Sunday. The Rams have said that, quote, they're going to keep an eye on his snaps, but he's apparently looked very good in practice. He's made some extensions, even making a one-handed grab in practice. The question with Kupp coming back is how is this going to affect our fantasy darling, Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell? Is Cooper Kupp going to be on a snap count going against the Eagles? These are just some unknowns that we don't really know. But again, in my opinion, I think that it's Cooper Kupp. If he starts, then you play him. You cannot leave him out of your lineup. Saquon Barkley, though, is a different animal. He's returned to practice, but it's no guarantee that he plays. He said that he's feeling encouraged, but that it's a tough injury and he's taking it one day at a time. That to me does not sound very promising, doesn't sound great. And then you look at all of the problems that the Giants have had along their offensive line and their injury report this week. It's basically every single person on their line has a questionable tag, including their center. Do you really want and or trust Saquon Barkley back in your lineup with that ankle injury that he might not be fully healed off of, with no protection on that line going against the Dolphins? I I wouldn't do it. And I'm not just saying that because I'm playing against him. Finally, Jonathan Taylor has returned to practice, but head coach Shane Steichen has remained very tight-lipped about his status for Sunday. The Titans do have a very tough run defense. They're only giving up the fourth most rushing yards per game, and they are leading the league in yards per attempt at only 2.9 yards per carry. And the Colts are also dealing with a ton of injuries across their offensive line. So I would be very cautious about putting Jonathan Taylor in your lineup this week, just until we see how he looks, how he's going to be incorporated. And I don't really know that he's going to be that efficient either way. And even if he doesn't play, if Zach Moss is going to be that efficient, this Titans run defense is what they have. The way that you beat the Titans is through the air. And I think that that's what's going to happen. We've got Rod in the chat with a question before we get to the injury news, which I will warn you is a lot. So grab your pen and paper, get ready to take notes. Rod says Jamison Williams of Detroit, Jordan Addison, Michael Wilson, Javonte, and Taylor. PPR need a wide receiver and a flex. So I am steering away from Jamison Williams. He has not been incorporated at all. I don't care that Amon-Ra St. Brown is hurt. I don't care that Josh Reynolds is banged up. You don't beat Carolina through the air. You beat them on the ground. This is going to be a David Montgomery and possibly Jahmyr Gibbs game, steering away from him. I'm also not sure that Javonte plays. I would actually go Jordan Addison and Michael Wilson in this situation. And I know it's weird to put your faith in two rookies, but the Chiefs Vikings game is supposedly going to be very high scoring. Jordan Addison has done well, aside from last week when he whipped on that block and then got pulled from the game. And Michael Wilson is slowly creeping up as a guy that you want in your lineup. So there we go. All right, let's move on to injury news. Again, like I mentioned, there are tons of injuries. So grab your pen and paper because there's a lot to go through. This is going to feel like I'm reading a newspaper, but it is going to help you make your start sit decisions on Sunday. But if you can't, make sure to tune in to the Sunday morning start sit show with John and Pimba and myself at 9 a.m. Eastern as we get you ready for week 5. So starting off, Bills tight end Dawson Knox has been limited all week with a knee injury. We've seen the snaps creep up for Dalton Kincaid. So if Knox can't go or even is limited, this could be the breakout week against a Jaguars defense that has allowed the second most fantasy points to the tight end position. He could be a sneaky DFS play with low ownership because nobody's really in on him. So keep an eye on the injury status of Dawson Knox. Jaguars wide receiver Zay Jones has still been limited with a knee injury that's kept him out for the past 2 weeks. So look for more Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk, especially with Bills cornerback Tre'Davious White out for the season with an Achilles injury. Panthers running back Miles Sanders has been limited all week with a lingering groin injury. And after last week, where he pulled the rug out from under all of us when he started and then ceded all of his touches to Chuba Hubbard, just be cautious about his status going into Sunday. On the other side of that matchup, Amon-Ra St. Brown did not practice Wednesday or Thursday, but in an interview, he said that he's expecting to play. Again, be very careful with that, as he could just be more of a decoy. It's going to be very difficult to pass on Carolina. Josh Reynolds has also been limited with a groin. And so does that mean that Jameson Williams is going to be a plug and play? Stay tuned for the stardom sit-em because, spoiler alert, I don't think it does. All right, this isn't directly related to fantasy, but the Giants' offensive line is really banged up. So even if Saquon Barkley comes back, it may be really tough sledding for him to get the points. Set your expectations appropriately if you put him back in your lineup. Saints quarterback Derek Carr is still dealing with the shoulder injury and is questionable for this week. Patriots running backs Ramondre Stevenson and Ty Montgomery have been limited with a thigh injury and illness, so Ezekiel Elliott may actually be in line for more work, unlike last week where he was supposed to take starter reps and then vanished. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Pittsburgh quarterback Kenny Pickett is expected to play with a knee injury, while tight end Pat Freiermuth is doubtful. Ravens running back Justice Hill has been limited with a foot and a hamstring injury, so we could end up seeing a lot of Gus Edwards this week against a Steelers defense that has allowed the 4th most rushing yards per game and the 6th most fantasy points per game to the running back. I love Gus Edwards this week. Like I mentioned earlier, Joe Burrow is no longer on the injury report for the Bengals, but let's be honest, we're not really going to trust him until we see him play. T. Higgins is dealing with a fractured rib, and although he wants to play and he's been out there campaigning that he might play, I just really think that it's unlikely. We talked about Cooper Kupp. He's the big story on the Rams, but they're also dealing with hip injuries to both Matthew Stafford and Kyron Williams. However, both are expected to play, which is good news if you have them on your fantasy rosters. Javonte Williams is still questionable for the Broncos after suffering a hip flexor, and this one's a big one because a lot of us spent a ton of fab on Jaleel McLaughlin this week. Today's practice report is going to tell us a lot as to his status this Sunday. I think I saw somewhere that McLaughlin went for 99 fab dollars in a league. Absolutely crazy. I don't expect Williams to play, but if he does, that's going to be something that is really going to bite some people after spending that much fab on him. Micah Parsons should be active for the Dallas Cowboys, And as Howard Bender said on the Alarm Fantasy Football Show yesterday, even a 75% Parsons is better than the majority of the linebackers in this league. On the other side of that matchup, the 49ers are dealing with injuries to Deebo Samuel and Juwan Jennings, who are once again limited this week in practice. But Deebo Samuel did manage to play last week without logging a practice. So I think that he's going to be good to go. Finally, for Sunday night, Jimmy Garoppolo remains in concussion protocol. He has been practicing a little bit this week, which bodes well for his chances to play. But I just, I don't know. Jimmy Garoppolo really, really worries me. So, before we get to the next segment, let's answer a couple more of these questions in the chat. Chris, great to see you. JT or Sanders this week, both not great O lines. That one is a tough one. I think I'm still going to have to roll with Sanders. I don't trust JT. He has not had the time to build rapport with this new offense with Shane Steichen. He missed basically all of training camp, all of preseason. He hasn't meshed with Anthony Richardson because he was absent from the facility. Sanders at least knows this offense. And if he's healthy, should get the load of the work. So don't feel great about either of them, but still going to roll with Sanders. Hal asks, how am I feeling about Joshua Downs? I love Josh Downs. I love Josh Downs when he was drafted. That story of Anthony Richardson and he in the parking lot throwing the ball back and forth because they were so ready to get on the field and start practicing is a wonderful connection. I know that Richardson did wear the Step Brothers shirt with Michael Pittman's face on it, but it does seem that Joshua Downs is the second target in this offense, with Alec Pierce just kind of being a decoy. He's been the all exercise team situation so far. And the way that you attack the Titans is through the air. So I expect Downs to get a lot of work. Angie, good to see you in there. Given the condition of the Giants O-line, after watching Jones take 11 sacks, I'm considering starting Dobbs instead of Jones. Thoughts? Yeah. I think that Dobbs has a ton of upside. We're going to get to it in the bold prediction segment, so I'll just leave it at that so that I don't spoil anything. But yeah, I like Dobbs over Daniel Jones this week. And before we get to this next thing, long-term worry for Javonte this season. Look, I've been worried about Javonte for a while, not just because of the new offense, the uncertainty that we have around that, but because statistically it shows that it takes a running back around a year or two to get back to the pre-injury efficiency. And so far, we really haven't seen a lot out of Javonte. The Denver offense is not efficient. Pretty worried about him season long, to be completely honest, especially if McLaughlin can take on and be as efficient as he has been, getting 100 yards on 10 touches last week. So there we go. A lot of you guys in the chat, I also saw in the BetterCast app last night. And if you're new, have you tried the BetterCast app yet? They're gamifying the NFL on the BetterCast app, and you can join our free-to-play contest during NFL games this Sunday, Monday, and Thursday night games. You can predict what will happen prior to the game kicking off. You make your picks. You test your NFL knowledge. You can also chat with our community, which is so much fun. Again, so many people in this chat I saw in the chat last night talk about the top performers, talk about the busts in real time. Watch the NFL games with us this Sunday, play our free contest, and you can win prizes. Download the free BetterCast app in the Apple app or Google Play stores today for free. As I mentioned earlier, we've also got matchup previews over at Fantasy Alarm. Howard Bender has his DFS watch list that he just updated. We've got the lineup generator, everything that you need, not only for NFL, but for every single sport, you can get with our All Pro subscription over at fantasyalarm.com. Go to fantasyalarm.com/allpro to sign up today. And I believe today is the very last day of the 7-day free trial. So go ahead, grab that free trial while you can. check it out this weekend, um, and, use your winnings so that you can continue with us throughout the rest of the season. So now that we've talked about injuries, let's talk about some matchups because there are some ton of juicy matchups going on this week. Coop talked about it in Coop's Fantasy Fiasco, going through all the matchups, but I want to dig in a little deeper and talk about some players who you could start or sit in your lineups. Again, to get the full week 5 matchup report, go to fantasyalarm.com and look for the week 5 matchup report preview that yours truly put out there. Um, so first, let's start with the stardom. Number 1, David Montgomery. Okay, this has nothing to do with the fact that he scored 3 touchdowns last week. And well, maybe it does, but still. He's going up against the Carolina Panthers, who have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs and rank dead last in DVOA versus the run. The Lions are heavily favored, and they showed us last week that even when they're ahead, that they're not afraid to use Montgomery as a bell cow. He had 32 carries last week, even when they were blowing out the Packers. Detroit is not afraid to utilize the run, especially with their wide receiving core banged up. I think David Montgomery is an automatic plug and play. Another guy who's an automatic plug and play for me is Breece Hall. Breece Hall is set to have an absolute huge game. He's been limited as they've worked him back from that ACL injury, but now he is a full go. So move over, Russell Wilson. You're not the only Mr. Unlimited in this matchup, okay? The Broncos have allowed the most rushing yards per game in the entire league, and Hall is clearly the lead back, leading the running backs in snaps even when he was limited. So he is set to absolutely go off this week. On the flip side this week, I have Jerry Jeudy as a must start. With Sauce Gardner shadowing Cortland Sutton, this is going to be a rough matchup for him. So I expect Jeudy to be the leading receiver. DJ Reed has also been ruled out for the Jets, leaving some holes in that Jets secondary. And Jeudy did tie Sutton for targets last week. So you can expect that number to rise in what could be an interesting game, depending on how effective Breece Hall is. So next I have Rashee Rice. And this is going to be weird to some of you guys because what has Rashee Rice done for you lately? Whether you have Rice as a stash or if you're looking for a cheap DFS play, he has a stellar matchup this week against a putrid Minnesota Vikings defense. We know that it's Travis Kelce than basically everyone else in the Kansas City Chiefs passing core, but Rice has emerged as the top dog in the everyone else category. Although there are some guys like Justin Watson and MVS running more routes, Rice was a close second on the team, or he was second on the team in targets behind Travis Kelce. And he has been so close to scoring a couple times. I think there have been 2 games where he's been brought down on the 1-yard line. This is a primo matchup for Rice to break out this week. Finally, for the start column, I'm going Dalton Kincaid. We mentioned it earlier that Dawson Knox is limited and may not start. Even if he does, Kincaid has been the main pass catching tight end in this offense, earning a 20% target share in week 4. And the Jaguars have given up the 2nd most fantasy points to the tight end position. This game actually may be closer than we expect it due to the Bills having to travel and the Jaguars already used to that time change. So I do expect the Bills to throw much more than they had to last week in that blowout against the Dolphins. Before we go to the sits, let's get to a couple of these questions. If I can find my cursor. Um, so let's see. Chef, welcome in. Great to see you. PPR trade hit my inbox. Trade away ARSB and Pittman. Get back Nico Collins and JT. I'd stand pat. I would keep ARSB and Pittman. They are both the number 1 on their offense. Pittman is running 100% of his team snaps. Nico Collins, although he's been great, has actually kind of, faded in and out when it comes to a bad matchup. Sometimes it's Tank Dell that gets the looks over Collins. So I would stick with what you've got. I know JT is enticing, but again, like we mentioned, We don't really know how he's going to look in this offense. Paul, great to have you here. Should I start Gus Edwards or Breece Hall? Absolutely start Breece Hall, but if you have an opportunity to sneak Gus Edwards in there, I would do it. I think he's getting a ton of workload, and we'll hit that later in the underdog segment. Panthers secondary is great too, as Mr. Scamper says. Hammer Monty. Sellers starting Monty and Breece Hall in every DFS lineup this week. It is chalky, but I think you're onto something. All right, guys, let's move on to the sit-ems for week 5. The first of which is Jared Goff. Okay, we watched this a little bit with David Montgomery, but the way to attack the Carolina Panthers is on the ground. And with such a positive game script and a banged up Amon-Ra St. Brown and Josh Reynolds, I don't expect the volume to be there for Goff. I think that it's a trap because everyone's looking at, the point spread and the over-under, things like that. It's going to be the run game all the way. Next is literally any of the Falcons pass catchers. Okay. We bought into all of the preseason hype about Desmond Ridder and Drake London building a connection. And based on what they did in that 4-game sample size last season, you would think that they would be able to carry that momentum into this year. Ha! What fools we were to believe that narrative. Drake London is wide receiver 52 in PPR leagues this year, and Kyle Pitts is tight end 29. The Texans defense has also been surprisingly good against the pass. They're ranking 5th in pass yards per game, and I expect Bijan Robinson to take over this game, as the run defense is the Texans' weakness right there. Next is going to be Jameson Williams. We touched on this in a question earlier. I feel like this is an obvious one, but I know that there will be people out there who are just chomping at the bit to get him back in their lineups, especially with the rest of the receivers banged up. I am here to tell you, do not fall for it, guys. Don't fall for it. We haven't seen much out of Williams in the first place. Then he's coming back. He needs to get acclimated to the offense. Just don't do it. Fine. Next, we're going to go to Jonathan Taylor. And I hate this. I really do hate this because I love that he's back in the lineup. I love that everybody held on to him and that he's not being traded. But for much of the same reason that we're not starting Jameson Williams, we're not starting Taylor. Not only has he not played or practiced with Anthony Richardson and the new offense, the Titans' run defense is very, very good. This is not the matchup to bring him back, not to mention the offensive line issues that the Colts are going into this game with. Finally, we're going Darren Waller. I hate this because, again, in preseason, he's uncoverable. We can do this. He's the number 1 target on the team. We had to pull him off of practice just so that Daniel Jones would throw to somebody else. No. Even with the usage as far as snaps and routes, we are not seeing the production and targets for Darren Waller to be productive. It's pretty pathetic, to be honest. You add in the Giants' offensive line woes. This is just not a good matchup for Darren Waller. And at this point in the season, it's a big enough sample size to know that he's just not going to get it done. So there are the start and sits for this week. We're going to take a real quick break, but coming up next, we are going to talk some week 5 bold predictions. I'm going to give you mine, but I also want to hear yours in the chat. So have them ready. We'll be back in a few minutes.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, and they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. There's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Like, here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game that they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman, and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky, is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
All right, guys, we're back, and it's what you've all been waiting for the entire show. This is Week 5 bold predictions. I hope that you guys get spicy, because I cannot wait to hear what you guys put in the chat for these bold predictions. So I'm going to go ahead and go through mine, and then we'll pull up some from the chat as we go through with these. But going back to Angie's question earlier in the show, whether or not to start Josh Dobbs, my very first bold prediction, I think that the Cardinals beat the Bengals. We all expected the Cardinals to lay down and play dead with Josh Dobbs at quarterback, huge holds on defense, etc. But they have been fighting tough. They've almost won a couple of close games. They almost beat the Commanders. They almost beat, I believe it was the Bills. They did beat my Dallas Cowboys in a horrific game for my mental health. And they even played fairly well last week against the 49ers. So I think that Michael Wilson is coming on opposite of Marquise Brown. James Conner's been a big surprise. And the Bengals defense looks like a wet paper bag. They can't hold anything. They've allowed 364 offensive yards per game, and they are very susceptible to the run game, giving up the second most rushing yards per game. This is going to be a variation. I don't know if you guys know the children's story of the tiger and the woodpecker story. Basically, this tiger got a bone stuck in its mouth. He couldn't eat, couldn't drink. The woodpecker came along and asked the Bengal or the tiger that if he would pull it out if the Bengal wouldn't eat him. Then he pulled it out. They had this relationship. The Bengal did try to eat him. So the woodpecker pecked out one of his eyes. I think that's what's going to happen, except instead of a woodpecker, it's going to be a cardinal this week. Next, I think, Mr. Scampers, you were in there on that one. I absolutely agree with you there. Secondly, I think that the Cowboys shock the 49ers and take home the win on the road this week. For the first time this entire season, Dallas is going to have their entire starting offensive line back ready to go. And that cannot be understated enough. Dallas has been plagued by penalties, a lot of which were caused by the inexperienced offensive line. Now that they've got Zach Martin, Tyron Smith, everybody back in this lineup against a very tough San Francisco defensive front, it's going to make all the difference in the world. The Dallas defense also hopefully learned their lesson in containing the run in that aforementioned loss against the Cardinals. And although I think it will be close, I think that the Dallas defense forces Brock Purdy into some costly mistakes, and they win in a close one. Next, I think that Calvin Ridley gets 7 receptions, 84 yards, and 2 touchdowns this week against the Bills. I know Ridley has been disappointing since his week 1 performance, But with Tre'Davious White out and quarterback Christian Benford and edge rusher Gregory Rousseau questionable, Lawrence should have plenty of opportunity to get that ball downfield to Ridley and make this a close one in London. And again, as we mentioned earlier in the injury report, Zay Jones may not go. So I really like Ridley in this matchup. Next, I think that Nico Collins and CJ Stroud absolutely torch Atlanta's secondary to continue their surprising streak. Atlanta's secondary may have been good up until now, but I think the Wonder Twins put a stop to that. While Collins is only 54th in target separation, he's first among every single wide receiver in juke rate. And with Jeff Okudah putting up disappointing numbers in his limited snaps so far this season, I think that he gets away with it and gets another multiple touchdown game. I know that a lot of people think that it's going to be AJ Terrell that is going to shadow Nico Collins. I don't think that's going to be the case. So I'm really excited to see this Houston offense and juggernaut continue. Just pretty stoked on Nico Collins. And again, as I say that, I've probably jinxed it because every time I take him out of my lineup, he goes off. When I, put him in my lineup, he just lays an egg. So let's see what we've got in the chat from you guys. If I can roll this up here. I always have problems with this chat or with this scroller. So Mr. Scampers agreed with me on the Cardinals. That's Scampers, you and I, same page. Mwah. Hal says Alexander Madison goes 95 with 2 and 2 with 3 catches for 4 yards. I like that. I actually do like that. It's going to be a very high scoring game. It makes sense to keep the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands and keep that game script on the ground and use clock management. And Madison is due, right? He had a very rough start to the season, but he's kind of come on over the past couple weeks. So I can definitely see that happening. Now, what I can't see happening is your next comment, Hal, that the Cowboys don't score a touchdown against San Francisco. Look, Hal, let's be real. This game is going to be close. He says 27-9 San Francisco. Mr. Scampers puts another one in the chat saying that Monty gets 3 again. I can see that happening as well. The Lions definitely showed that they were not afraid to utilize their bell cow in a positive game script situation. 32 carries to, I think it was 8, even with Jahmyr Gibbs. Yes, Jahmyr Gibbs did get a few more of those targets, but they know that David Montgomery is the bell cow back in this offense. And against that Carolina defense, I really think that we see some very, very big fantasy numbers. Sellers, I'm glad that you're glad that I believe. Hal with another one in here. Josh Allen finishes as QB 20. That one's an interesting one because, it is the Josh Allen Bowl. If you guys don't remember, a couple of years ago, it was the Josh Allen versus Josh Allen Bowl. It was the first time that somebody with the same name got a sack since they started recording sacks in 1982. I really like that. I think that that's great. Tua throws for 400. Waddle gets right. I really hope that you're right, Scampers, because I have a ton of exposure to Jalen Waddle this season. Chef says Michael Wilson repeats last week's breakout. I am all for that. I absolutely agree with you there. And then Chef says Miami won't even have to pass against the Giants. Maybe they won't. But, we've seen them do crazier things. And the pass game hasn't exactly been on track. So maybe they want to reform their pass game and just use this like as a scrimmage game. We'll have to see. All good takes. If you have more, please tweet me on Twitter at Britt_Flinn. I would love to hear your takes for this week. As we saw last night, anything can happen in any given week in the NFL. And bold predictions are what makes this game so fun. One more question before we move on. Will Hayes in the chat. Welcome, Will. Jalen Waddle or Devonta Smith, 12-team PPR. I'm going to go Devonta Smith, I think. I think that this is a Devonta Smith week. I think that this game is actually going to be a little bit more of a shootout than the odds makers are making it out to be, especially with the return of Cooper Kupp And I think the ball gets spread around a little bit more than it has been in the past, where it's just been one guy or the other, whether it's AJ Brown or Devonta Smith going off week to week. I think this week both are going to eat and eat very, very well. All right. So, as you guys know, Britt's Fantasy Blitz is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy offers new contests and chances to win every single day. You can play their pick'em contests by choosing higher or lower on 2 to 5 of your favorite players' stats. And the more you pick, the more you can win. You can choose from MLB, NFL, PGA, and more sports. Underdog Fantasy also offers daily drafts with leagues ranging from 2 to 12 players. And now there is a brand new way to play Underdog Fantasy by making picks during the game with their in-game pick'em. All you need to do to get involved with Underdog Fantasy is to sign up at fantasyalarm.com/underdog with promo code ALARM. First-time depositors get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And again, that's fantasyalarm.com/underdog, promo code ALARM. Underdog has also launched a new contest where they are giving away $2 million this NFL season, introducing $100,000 Sundays. So basically, each week, a $100,000 pot will be up for grabs to those who submit a pick'em every week with the designated player. It's $10,000 to 10 different winners. And this week, the selected player is DeAndre Hopkins. You can choose his higher or lower on 51.5 total yards versus the Indianapolis Colts and be entered to win. For what it's worth, I'm going higher. There's no Treylon Burks. The Colts secondary has been very sus. I know we're all expecting Derrick Henry to do things, but with the only receiving option being DeAndre Hopkins and him being removed from the injury report, I think he goes higher. So, of course, you need to couple that with some other picks from this week too, right? So let's talk about a few that are available for week 5. So first off, I mentioned this. It is the Josh Allen Bowl in England this week. Josh Allen, the defensive player, with 0.5 sacks. I am going higher. Again, if you don't remember that Josh Allen Bowl a few years ago, it was Allen on Allen crime. It was the first time a player had sacked a player with the same name since sacks became a stat in 1982. Last week, Allen actually had 3 sacks against the Atlanta Falcons, and he's been off to a hot start. The Bills have allowed 9 sacks through 4 games so far this year, so I expect us to have another Allen Bowl very early in the morning on Sunday. Next, I'm going with Dalton Kincaid, 4 targets. I'm taking the higher on this. As we talked about earlier, Kincaid has had 4 targets last week in a very positive game script situation. And with Dawson Knox out, that number should increase. I am looking for a Dalton Kincaid breakout game, baby. Let's go. Next, Gus Edwards with 43.5 rushing yards. I'm taking the higher. Justice Hill is banged up with both a foot and a hamstring injury. We can expect Gus Edwards to get the bulk of the work. He averages 5 yards per carry, not just this year, but in every single year that he's played in the NFL. And the Steelers have been atrocious on defense, allowing 148.5 rushing yards per game. I expect this stat to actually increase as we get closer to Sunday, but where it is right now, the higher is so juicy, so juicy. Next, we're going to go with Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers, set at 18.5 receiving yards. And I'm going to go higher because despite Matt Canada saying that Najee Harris was unequivocally the starter, the two really have been splitting snaps. And it has been Warren who's earned the bulk of the targets. Last week, he saw 6 targets and finished with 26 receiving yards. Now with Pat Freiermuth doubtful to suit up, there should be even more targets to go around. And the Ravens are in the middle of the pack in receptions allowed to running backs at 4.75. So this should be another great day for Warren. Next, I'm going to go with Jared Goff, 30.5 passing attempts. I'm taking the lower on this. We talked about it in our sit-ems, but throwing is not the way that you beat the Panthers. You beat them on the ground. Scampers thinks that Monty's going to have 3 touchdowns. I think he's going to have several touchdowns. With Amon-Ra St. Brown and Josh Reynolds beat up, 30 attempts seems very, very high. So again, we're taking the lower on Jared Goff's passing attempts. Finally, we've got David Montgomery with 0.5 touchdowns. What do you guys think we're going? Because I'm going with the higher. We've talked about it. We've hammered on it. He's in my stardom column. He's in our bold predictions column. The matchup lends itself to saying that David Montgomery is going to have a humongous game. He is a beast, and he may find the end zone multiple times this week. So that wraps up our underdog picks of the day. Again, to sign up, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog. Use the promo code ALARM. First-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And along with these pick'em contests, they're also running weekly contests, in-game pick'ems. There really is something for everyone. So get on over there and check it out today. Hal is asking, Keaton Mitchell going to be a fantasy option this year? I really don't know. I don't think that I think with Lamar Jackson is going to do Lamar Jackson things. We thought that this was going to be an air raid offense. So far, it hasn't been. Lamar Jackson is still taking off, running. They don't really need another running back in that rotation. Maybe he can be involved if some more injuries happen to Edwards and or Hill. But right now, I'm not super in on him. Mr. Scampers, I'm so sorry. I'm taking the higher on Fields and DJ Moore wrecking me in 3 leagues. Yes. I have Fields in my big money league, but I was playing against DJ Moore. I do not like how that feels whatsoever. Hal saying anyone over 28 should always be on the injury report. Hey, I take offense to that. I am always on my game. But you're right. I should be on the injury report as well. Mr. Scampers, that's fantasy football, baby. And you're absolutely right. This is why we play this game. Go ahead. If you have any last minute start sits, throw them in the chat because we're close to the end of the show already. How fast does an hour go by when we're having so much fun, not only talking football, but talking with each other and communicating in the chat. It's a great time to be had. Chef, you are so sweet. I appreciate that. So if you haven't downloaded the Bettercast app, make sure that you go to the Apple Play Store or Google Play Store, download that app, check out the pregame questions that happen every Sunday night, Monday night, and Thursday night, and then you can answer questions throughout the game. You can chat with everybody who's also watching the game. It's a whole big community. And if you earn tickets by answering questions right, you can redeem those tickets for prizes. I know there was somebody, I believe it was Dustin Ludke in the chat last night, saying that he already has enough tickets to redeem for an NFL hoodie. So get on over there, download the Bettercast app today. Join us this Sunday night, again, for the Cowboys and 49ers game. You know that I'm going to be in that chat, probably, talking a lot, depending on how this game goes. Also, make sure that you jump over to fantasyalarm.com/allpro. Take advantage of the very last day for our 7-day free trial. It includes all sports, our lineup generator, all tools, everything that you would need to dominate across your fantasy leagues. Take it for a spin in week 5 and see what it has to offer for you. Coming up next on the Better Sports Network schedule, from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, we have the Fantasy Football Game Show from Front Yard Fantasy. From 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, we have the Better Sports Betting with Dan Servadidio and Howard Bender. 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, we have the MLB DFS live stream with James Grande and John Impemba. And as it is postseason baseball, this one is going to be a very, very must-see show. Before we get out of here, Mr. Scampers says, Scott Fishbowl, need to sit one. Boyd, Gabe Davis, or Zay Flowers? I think that I'm sitting Gabe Davis. I don't think that he's really shown a lot. He's been quietly consistent, but with T. Higgins likely out, I think that Boyd sees those targets with Joe Burrow's calf and that inability to throw deep. I think that that's where Tyler Boyd lives. I think it's going to be actually Trenton Irwin who gets the outside work in 3 wide receiver sets, and Boyd still remains in the slot. So I really like him. Also really like Zay Flowers. Even when Odell Beckham was in week 1, it was Flowers seeing all the targets. Just don't really think that you can trust Gabe Davis outside of those big long bombs. Sellers, of course, in the chat disagreeing with me. We'll have to talk about this when he gets home from work. So thank you guys so much. Make sure to tune in again to our Start Sit show at 9 a.m. Eastern with myself and John and Pimba as we get you ready for week 5. There is another London game, so make sure to wake up early, get those lineups put in, because the worst feeling is not getting your lineups put in before kickoff of these stinky London games. That's going to do it for us. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Follow us on Twitter at Britt_Flinn. Make sure to like and subscribe. Really appreciate having all you guys in the chat. We will see you next Friday. Join us then. Have a great weekend. And as always, thank you so much for getting blitzed with Britt.